Comrades and friends, history is always written by the victors. And therefore, for millions of ordinary working people, whether it's in Britain or in Pakistan, it's very hard to know about our own history. Even if you go far back in time, to the times of the Roman Empire, you find that Spartacus, when he organized the slaves in the slave revolt, the only thing we know about that marvelous movement unparalleled in history, the only sources that we have are the sources of the Romans, written by the bitterest enemies of Spartacus and the slaves. If you take the school books in any country, what do you read? You find there the names of kings and princes and politicians and generals. What you will not find is the names of the millions of ordinary people, men and women, workers and peasants who create the wealth of the world and upon whom the whole of society rests. The dumb millions. No voice, no face, no name, no history. And you know this is important. History is not a game, you know. It is not something of no importance, as many people think that history is what, a source of amusement, innocent amusement. No, my friends, no. You know, history is so important, and that's the importance of this marvelous book. Pakistan's other story, I would say Pakistan's real story, as against the fairy stories that you read in the official history. But my dear friend, a comrade of many years standing, Comrade Lal Khan, what is the importance of this book? Why is history so important? I will tell you why history is so important. And that idea was very well expressed many years ago by a remarkable man, an American, by the way, not a Marxist, not a revolutionary, the great American philosopher George Santayana, who said, and Ted Grant was very fond of this quote, "He who does not learn from history will forever be condemned to repeat it." My friends, we don't want to repeat history. We don't want to repeat the defeats of the past, but therefore you have to learn from history. And therefore, for us, this book is not about history. This is not a fossil from a museum. This is not about history. This is about the present and the future of the workers, of the working people. Not just of Pakistan, but of the entire world. Now, there's such a lot in this book, it's difficult for me to compress, but we must give time to Comrade Lal Khan. I'm sure he's the main speaker that you want to hear. But you see, this is a book about a remarkable year, 1968. It wasn't just remarkable in Pakistan. I remember I'm getting old a bit now, but I'm not young and fresh like my friend Lal Khan. I'm getting on a little bit. But I can remember 1968, you know, as if it was yesterday. I remember that year very vividly. It was the year of the greatest revolutionary general strike in history in Europe. You know, I think many of our friends from Pakistan might think, oh, well, those of you who live in Europe, well, you know, revolution in Europe, you won't have a revolution in Europe, all the workers are conservative and so on. Not so, my friend, not so. In 1968, there was the biggest revolutionary general strike, I would say, possibly in history. And it came, I remember, like a bolt from a clear, like a thunderbolt from a clear blue sky. No warning. In fact, many, I would say most, I would say all of the so-called intellectuals, particularly on the left, came to the conclusion that nothing would happen in Europe. Nothing will happen in France. Because the workers were supposed to be bourgeoisified, were supposed to be Americanized. I remember this discussions very well. And here you had this remarkable movement. I went to France at the time. I witnessed this colossal movement, which I can't express to you in words, but it's not the subject, of course, of tonight's discussion. But it is part. I think Tanya deals with this, and it's very important. Socialism, my friends, is international or it is nothing. We are not nationalists. We are internationalists. And we don't recognize, Marx said the workers have no country. The working man has no country. It's a fact. It's a simple fact. What do you own? What do the workers and peasants in Pakistan own? They own nothing. What do the workers do? Do the workers own the factories of Pakistan? Do the peasants own the land of Pakistan? What is Pakistan as far as the masses are concerned? Or Britain, or France, or India? No, no, no. The workers have no country. What impressed me deeply about this book is its true internationalism. It starts not with Pakistan, and that's quite correct. It starts with France, it starts with Europe, with this marvellous movement of our class, a class that knows no country, that has no flag, that has no national interest, only the interest, like Spartacus and the slaves, of fighting for freedom and fighting for the rights of ordinary people. Yes, I remember that well. And at that time, the whole of the attention of Europe, in particular, was based on France. People who were intrigued by France, and it spread later to Italy. And therefore, when this colossal movement occurred in Pakistan, I think that very few people in Britain, as far as I remember, paid any attention. They didn't even notice. I think it got about this much in the columns of the Times newspaper. I was a young student at that time in Sussex University. I was active in the movement, the Marxist movement. I have been all my life. I noticed it, and it made a deep impression on myself to the extent, as Tanvir knows, I wrote about it at the time. I was one of the very few. I wrote an article at the time entitled Pakistan, Revolution Betrayed. In fact, I reread that article, Tanvir, when you asked me to, Lal Khan, when you asked me to write the introduction to the book, which I was very honoured to be able to do. I reread that article. I don't think I'll have to change anything, and most of the introduction I wrote is based upon this article. We coincide entirely. Everything you write in that, I think, is what the impression that I had at that time. I was very pleased. This was a marvellous movement. It's a pity. To this very day, the people in Europe don't know that it existed. I'm sorry to say that maybe many people in Pakistan don't know anything about this. The young people in Pakistan, do they know about this marvellous movement? Many do not. And that's our task. That's why I was so delighted when I heard that Lal Khan was preparing this book. And that's the importance of it. Lenin once said a very profound thing. He said many profound things. But one of the most interesting things that he said, when defining what is a revolutionary party, he said this: the revolutionary party, my friends, is the memory of the working class. Just think of that. What mechanism is there? We know animals learn by instinct. They don't have to learn anything. They're born with a natural knowledge of many things. But human society is not like this. And therefore, a tradition can be lost so easily. People forget. Even people that participated in this movement probably have forgotten many of the things. And therefore, it's our task, a task which Lal Khan and the struggle have carried out very well indeed. It's our duty to carry on this tradition, comrades, to pass on these lessons, these marvellous lessons, to the youth who are the future. They must learn from our experience, our victories and our defeats, our successes and our failures. Otherwise, we're not doing our duty. But the comrades in Pakistan, I think, are doing their duty. And they are doing it, I think, extremely well. This was a marvellous movement. Actually, I think, in many respects, Zakir put 1968 in France in the shade. You know, Europeans perhaps don't like to think that they can be put in the shade by the millions in the East. But you know, Jesus Christ once said, the Christian church once said, a light shines from the East. Wasn't the Russian Revolution in the East? Of course it was. Of course it was. And in Pakistan we had a marvellous movement. It really was tremendous a source of inspiration here. Some old people still, there's nobody old in this room.
Thank you.
No old people in there. I don't see any old people in this room. I see some people that are younger than others, that's all. No, we're not old. We'll never be old because the movement keeps us young, Lal Khan.
Yeah.
The revolution keeps us young. Marxism keeps us young. Socialism keeps us young. Yes, but this memory is all important. This was a movement that put France in 1968 in the shade. Here you had a movement of millions, well described in this book. I think I agree with Zakir. It's not just a work of history, it's a literary work of the first order. Here in these pages, we have a very vivid account of this wonderful, for the first time you could see the face and the voice and the names of these millions of ordinary people, workers and peasants. The workers seized the factories, and where were the leaders, by the way, the so-called leaders? You know, they were completely left behind. All of them had written off the working. They always do. They systematically write off. They lose faith in the working class and the peasants. Oh, no, they will never rise. They will never rise. But they always do, you know. In the end, they always do rise. Not because they want to rise, but because they have no alternative but to fight against this system which is crushing them, which is crushing the life out of them. And today I agree with what Zakir, every word that Zakir said about Puchtunkhwa is true. And not only Puchtunkhwa. The life is being strangled and throttled and crushed out of millions of people in the whole of Pakistan, in the whole of India, in the whole of Asia. And what have the workers got to do in a situation like this except to fight? Yes, fight, my friends. Fight by all means. But when you fight, you must have clear ideas, you know. The enemy is not stupid. And therefore we require what was missing in 68. And here's a great tragedy. It's enough to make you weep. When you look at the enormous fighting spirit of these millions of ordinary people who've never read a book, perhaps couldn't read, in their lives. But they became giants. And they became giants because they stood up to their true height and began to fight for the revolution. What a marvelous movement. The workers seized the factories, the peasants seized the land, the workers set up Soviets, peasants set up Soviets. They didn't call them that. It's a Russian word. It doesn't matter. I don't know what is the word in Urdu.
Panchayat.
Pardon?
Panchayat.
Panchayat. Well, there you are. But it's the same. Translated into Urdu, it's the same phenomenon. A marvelous inspiration. You know, my friends, the workers and peasants of Pakistan, this marvelous movement had everything that was required to change society. Everything except one thing. Except one thing, which is the most important thing of all: a genuine mass revolutionary party and a genuine revolutionary Marxist leadership. That was what was absent. That is what is required. And the revolution can't really succeed without this. It wasn't the fault of the workers that they were doing. What more do you ask? What more can you ask of the workers of Karachi and Lahore and Hyderabad and Peshawar? What more could you ask than what they gave in 1960? You can't ask any more of the ordinary people. What was lacking was leadership. The Stalinists, the so-called communists, to their eternal shame, most of them I think were Maoists in Pakistan, because Ayub Khan, this monstrous dictator, not as monstrous as the man that followed him, this dictator, because he was friendly with Peking, with Beijing, he was okay. They didn't want trouble. The Chinese bureaucracy, the Chinese were friendly towards Ayub Khan. They didn't want a revolution in Pakistan. Then you had the PPP. And by the way, a most important chapter in this, several chapters in this book, deal with this important question of the PPP. The PPP, it's true, was formed before these